Hello, hello. Welcome in, everybody. Good morning and welcome to Piano Practice Lab, day 1. I'm really excited to be here with you for the next 4 days here in Piano Practice Lab to help you design a weekly practice routine that is going to accelerate your progress consistently and move you beyond the notes to confident musical expression. So to get us started, go ahead and say hello. Let's warm our fingers up. You're not actually going to need your fingers that warm. You're not going to be playing the piano today, but let's warm our fingers up and type in the chat and let me know where you are joining from and just say hello. We're going to get to know each other and spend some good time together this week. So it'd be great for everybody to get used to typing in the chat. Now, you are in the right place if you are a piano player, first of all, that wants to be able to express yourself musically, but you are experiencing roadblocks in getting there. Now, I always describe this as you can hear what you want. Like in your ear, you heard the piece originally, you connected with it, you fell in love with the piece of music, you know what you want it to sound like, but you aren't able to consistently do that, right? So go ahead and type music in the chat if this sounds familiar. If you're like, oh yeah, that's me. I can connect to the music. I feel the music. I know what I want it to sound like, but I'm not exactly sure how to consistently do it. Maybe you have glimpses of it. Maybe sometimes you can make your fingers do what you want them to do, but it's not completely consistent. Type music in the chat if that sounds familiar. Hello, everybody. I see all of the highs. This is so great to see you all. Okay, so you're in the right place. If you are struggling with things like repeated wrong notes, especially when you're kind of in the flow and you're playing along and then you're surprised by those wrong notes or mistakes, you're in the right place if you struggle with consistency. Now, that means that maybe one day you have a practice session that goes really, really well, and you're like, yes, I'm getting it. I can do this. And then the next day, it's like all of a sudden your hands completely forgot what you did the day before, and they're not cooperating and you're unable to do it. That's what I mean by consistency. An issue with consistency could also mean that when you play through certain sections of music, like half the time they're really good and half the time they fall apart. Okay. You're in the right place if you can't play through a piece without pausing in a lot of places or without completely stopping at the tricky spots. And you are also in the right place if you have some big piano goals, like you have pieces that you want to learn, you have things that you want to do, but you're unsure of how to map out your practice to get you there. So you've been maybe sitting down at the piano each day and practicing, but you feel like you're not making progress, or you could be more effective or more efficient with that time. Okay, so let's type yes in the chat if any of that resonated with you. Go ahead and type yes in the chat. Awesome. Just keeping my eyes on the chat. There's a lot going on in there. Okay, so I'm Ashlee, and I'll give a little bit more of an in-depth introduction in a little while. But if I haven't met you before, I see a lot of new faces and definitely some familiar faces as well. But hello. And I'd also like to introduce Haria, who I know some of you have been corresponding with via email. Haria, I'm going to try to find you and spotlight you really quickly, but if I don't, if you can just give a little wave on the screen. Haria is here and she is going to be helping out with the chat, answering questions. She's also going to put the workbook link in the chat right now. So if you didn't get that workbook, I know there was an error on my part. I'm so sorry. Okay, so Haria is going to drop a link to the workbook in the chat. My bad, on Saturday there was a broken link in that email, but I hope all of you got the workbook, and if not, here it is. You didn't necessarily have to have it before today, but those of you that did have it, it was really enjoyable to see the pictures that you posted and to read, the answers to your questions that you sent me. I really enjoyed that, and I look forward to doing more of that as we go on throughout these 4 days together. And then Haria is also going to be your personal success coordinator. So I'm going to have her drop her email address in the chat. It's info@casualtheconfidentpianoplayer.com. And if you guys need anything during these 4 days together, please reach out via email. And we'll also likely reach out to you to get to know you a little bit more. But now you have contact information if you didn't have it before. And that way you can get in touch with us. So as we get started, I want to get to know you a little bit more. Like I said, some of you sent pictures and some of you sent emails with your responses, and I loved reading those. But I would love to have it in the chat so that I can read through later, and also so that you can get to know each other, because we're going to be spending some amazing time together, and it'll be that much more enjoyable and that much more fun when you can get to know some other piano players as well. So go ahead and type in the chat, why did you start playing piano? Maybe why and when. Okay. And those of you that are here live, you can type in the chat here in Zoom. And those of you that are watching the replay, whenever I say type in the chat, you can just comment below the video. Okay. I'm still going to see the comments. Other people that are watching the replay are still going to see the comments. So if you're here live, type in the chat. And if you're watching the replay, comment below the video. Why you started playing the piano and when. I'll give you a minute. I love it. I see because I love piano. Lots of people that started as kids and then are back at it. Your parents made you do it. Okay, great. So keep answering that question in the chat. And then I'm going to ask you another question as well. I want to know if you were to remove all of the limitations. Okay, so remove like your own voice that's like, no, that's not possible. Remove all the limitations. What is your biggest piano related dream? Okay, so maybe you want to be able to play on a stage in front of people. Maybe you want to just be able to play for a family member or a close circle of friends. Or maybe you just want to be able to play through a piece for yourself, just, alone in your house, just for the pure enjoyment of it. But type in the chat what your biggest piano dream is. Awesome. Play for family, play for choirs, to be able to perform classically, play in a band. Cool. Okay. And I'm curious what it would mean for you, like even in one word. What would it mean for you if you could reach that dream in the near future? So if that dream wasn't impossible, or if it wasn't years and years and years away, but if it was closer, if it could happen in the very near future. Amazing, pride, joy, awesome, fun, good. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a lot to type in the chat because I love for this to be very, very interactive. And I want, first and foremost, to teach you all and to have you walk away with some huge transformations and some really deep learnings. But I also want to get to know you. And I want to know, why you're here and what drives you to play music and why you connect with music. That's my favorite part about teaching, is just connecting with students and helping you learn, but also getting to know you. So this week, as I mentioned before, and as you know, we're here to design that weekly practice routine. I want to get you to the point that you can accelerate your progress consistently. So we're going to be talking a lot about consistency. And I want you to be able to move beyond the notes, beyond those mistakes, beyond those pauses, to get to that level of confident musical expression, regardless of what your goal is, right? Because whether you want to play for yourself or on a stage or for friends or record a video, that confident musical expression is going to make that so much easier. Now, when I say confident musical expression, I'm really curious what that means to you. Okay, like for yourself, what is confident musical expression? Does that mean no wrong notes? Does that mean being able to express your emotions? What does that mean? Go ahead and type that in the chat. And then one last question, and then I promise we're diving in here. Go ahead and type in the chat, what is the biggest thing standing in the way of you reaching your biggest piano dream? Okay, so of you reaching like the pride and your ability to play in front of others, what is the thing that's standing in the way of that? Someone is saying technique, wrong notes, your nerves, yes, hand coordination. Okay, awesome. So we're going to touch on a lot of stuff this week because Piano Practice Lab is a really comprehensive event. In order to really get you to the point that you have a routine that accelerates your progress consistently, we have to talk about a lot of different areas of piano practice. So we're going to touch on a lot of that. So we're going to dive in these 4 days, and we're going to talk about the way that you structure your practice sessions and why that is so important. Most people don't realize that the way that you structure your practice session lays a solid foundation, hopefully, for what's to come with your piano practice, right? If your foundation of how you're structuring your practice is really solid, then anything that you do on top of it, you're pretty much building up from there, right? But if your foundation of how you're practicing is not solid and it's a little bit rickety and not structurally sound, anything that you put on top of it is going to be shaky at best. Now, when you have a solid foundation of an effective practice routine, then you can focus on how to practice, because the way that you practice is the way that you sound. Okay. And I'm going to say that again to let it sink in a little bit. The way that you practice is the way that you sound. So in your piano practice, if you're inconsistent and you're not playing with a lot of accuracy, when you go to play through a piece, it's going to be inconsistent and there won't be a lot of accuracy. In your piano practice, if you're rushing through things just to try to get through them, you're likely going to do that when you play as well. You're going to be rushing through just trying to get through them. Okay. And so how you practice is how you sound. So if your playing is inaccurate and lacks consistency, it's likely because your practice is inaccurate and lacking in consistency. So we're going to talk about a lot of concrete practice methods to ensure that you are practicing in ways that lead you to accuracy and consistency, and then that leads you to that musicality. Okay. Now I'll give you an example here of a student that I used to work with whose name was Jamie. And I worked with Jamie for many, many, many years. And Jamie did eventually get to the point where he was like a superstar with practicing. But this was in the middle of our time working together. And we had a couple of lessons where I heard him for several weeks in a row and he kept showing up and things were really, really inconsistent. It was like he was working on a Brahms intermezzo and he would play the piece. And, 1 week it's like 90% of it would be good, but like 3 random spots would just completely fall apart. And then the week after that, it was 3 completely different parts that fell apart. And then the week after that, it was 3 completely different parts. And so it was just really, really inconsistent the way that he was sounding when he would play through the piece for me. And so I asked him how he practiced. And I will often do that. When I'm listening to someone play, I'll start with how you're practicing, because that will shed light usually on the answer of what we need to do to fix the problem. And so I asked Jamie how he was practicing, and he described what he was doing every day during his piano practice. And he was saying, okay, so I sit down, I play through my piece, and then I try to take a mental note whenever I make a mistake. And then once I've played through the piece, I go back to those spots where I made the mistakes and I practice those spots to fix those mistakes. Okay, so this is how he described that he practiced. And I want you to write practice in the chat if this sounds familiar or if this sounds like how you practice more or less. Okay, you play through the piece, you listen for mistakes, and then you go back and you fix those mistakes. Okay, so I see a couple people writing practice. So when Jamie described this practice to me, I was like, oh my gosh, I get it. I know what the problem is, because Jamie was practicing in a reactive way instead of a proactive way. Okay. And so what he was doing is he would play through the piece and then he would react to the mistakes that happened. And then he would structure his entire piano practice based off of the mistakes that he made that day. And so he was kind of reacting. It was almost like he would play through the piece and all of these little fires would be set. And then he would spend his piano practice running around trying to put out all the fires, right? And so it's a very reactive way to practice. And when I talk about practice, I'd like to try to be as proactive as possible. And when you're proactive, the gist of it is that you are trying to prevent the fires before they start. So you're not spending all of your time running around trying to put all the fires out. You're just trying to ensure the least amount of fires get started from the very beginning. Okay. And being proactive with your piano practice means that you plan it out before you play through anything. And it results in much faster progress to that confident musical expression because it allows you to be consistently accurate. Okay. And if you think about the way that Jamie was practicing, so he would play through his piece first, and it's almost like he was like setting the stage to allow for all of the mistakes. And then he would go put out all the fires. He would go fix the mistakes. But if you structure your practice where the first thing that you do is you address some of the spots that you know are tricky, you can likely create a situation where you're not setting so many fires to begin with. Okay. Now, if you haven't been to a class of mine before, a live class like this, then it's important to know that throughout these 4 days together, we're going to be each other's teammates. Okay. We're going to encourage each other and cheer each other on. I love being here live with you. And I really consider it an honor to foster a very compassionate learning environment where you get a chance to experience huge transformations, but also to connect with other piano players. We're going to spend a lot of time today talking about some common myths and going over some misconceptions and some mistakes about piano practice. Because once you know how not to practice, it's going to be a lot easier for you to absorb the information that we'll talk about in the next 3 days about how to practice. And the way that we're going to do this is likely going to be a little bit different than what you've experienced. We're going to cover structures and frameworks that apply for any level of piano player. So it doesn't matter if you are in the beginning part of your journey where you've only been at it for a couple of months, or if this has been a lifelong process for you, or if you're anywhere in between, okay? These frameworks will work for you. And it also doesn't matter what kind of music you're playing. So whether you want to play jazz or classical or pop or ragtime, it doesn't matter. I'm not super concerned what you're practicing. There's plenty of information about what to practice and how to play the Moonlight Sonata. But what we're going to focus on is how you're going to get there, how you are going to reach your goals, because that is where the gold is. And that's where there's not a lot of information, right? On how to be as effective and efficient as possible going where you want to go. When you take an effective framework, like what I'm going to teach you during our 4 days together, and you apply it to anything that you're practicing at the piano, it will help you achieve that accuracy and consistency. Okay. So when I talk about piano, I want you to imagine that every single time you sit down to practice, every single time you sit down to play, you know exactly how to practice to get where you want to go. And when I say where you want to go, I don't just mean like being able to play a certain piece. I mean to know where you're going and exactly what milestones you have to hit along the way in order to truly be able to play what you want to play. For example, the Moonlight Sonata with the level of beauty that it deserves. Okay. So we're also going to dive in, and in addition to talking about your practice routine, we're going to talk about revolutionary practice methods. And revolutionary practice methods are the way that you practice. This is the how, right? And the revolutionary practice methods help you get between different milestones on your way to being able to play a piece beautifully. So the big transformation happens when you have that roadmap with the breakdown of milestones, and when you have a little toolbox of all of these revolutionary practice methods that you can use, because you literally have a roadmap that gets you from point A to point B, and you have all of the tools to get you from those milestones to milestones. So the truth is, Piano Practice Lab is 4 days. It's one of the longest events that I do. And for that, I love it because I love to really get to know you. But by the time we're done, you're going to have some really big wins, some really big takeaways. I know you're going to have some transformations and some things that you are going to implement in your practice immediately and probably see some pretty big shifts and some pretty big results, which is really, really, really exciting. And for those of you that want to build on the momentum that you're going to get over these 4 days together, so that you can really have the longer term success and confidence at the piano, I'll invite you at the end to continue building on this foundation inside Casual the Confident Piano Player program. If you've heard of it, awesome. And if not, we'll talk about it later on in our time together. Now, some things that I want to go over to make sure that you have the most success during our time together. So I want you to fully show up each day with an open mind. And it's okay, if you can't make it to one of the lives or, you have a conflict, that's okay. You can watch a replay. Okay. But whether you're watching the replay or you're here live with me in the room, I want you to try to fully show up, be present, be here with me, try to limit distractions, which I know is so, so, so difficult, and come with an open mind, ready to learn. Okay. I want you to commit to doing the 4 days. If you come to one day, you're still going to learn a lot. You're still going to get some awesome nuggets of information. But where the real transformation happens is, yes, in the information you're going to learn, but often it's actually a little bit deeper. The transformation happens in the commitment that you make, the commitment that you make to yourself, to showing up for this piano dream that you have, and to really honoring that and making that commitment that you're going to immerse yourself in this topic that you're so passionate about. Just that commitment in and of itself can be transformational. Okay. And I promise you're going to learn stuff that will be transformational as well. But just that commitment and being willing to show up, that in and of itself will transform you. Now, I want you during our time together to keep a growth mindset. And if you have watched a lot of my videos, you might have heard me talk about growth mindset before. And if not, we'll touch on it just a little bit here. There's several different types of mindset, but a lot of the times in education, we talk about two: growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And growth mindset at its most basic definition means that you believe you can do something, you just need more information, right? So you believe that you are capable. A fixed mindset at its most basic definition, it means that you believe you lack the qualities to do something. And so an example of fixed mindset would be like, I can't play the piano the way I want to play because I'm too old, or because my memory isn't good enough, or because my fingers don't play fast enough, or I'm whatever excuses, whatever reasons you have for why you can't do it. And we all fluctuate between the two. It's very human and very natural to fluctuate between growth mindset and fixed mindset. But I want you to try to stay in a place of growth mindset during our 4 days together, because you can do it. I've been doing this a really long time. I've been teaching for 18 years and working with adults for that entire time. And I have yet to meet anyone that can't reach their goals, right? I have taught people that are retired. I think my oldest student was 87 years old, and he was able to get up on a stage and play in a recital, which was his piano dream. Okay. I have taught children as young as 2 and 3 years old that are able to do the same thing. You can do it. It's likely that you don't lack any inherent abilities. It's just that you need more information. You need the right information to help you get there. So I want you to all keep a growth mindset during these 4 days together, and that's going to allow you to really absorb the information and actually take away some big learnings from this event. Okay. I also want you to talk to yourself kindly. All right. And if you've been in one of my courses or classes before, I do this exercise a lot, but we're going to do it today because it's really helpful. I want you to think about the very best teacher that you've ever had. I'll give you a second. And if you have trouble choosing one, it could be a couple. The very best teacher, and this doesn't have to be a school teacher. This could be a mentor. This could be someone that taught you in a job, like someone, maybe like a work mentor. It could just be a neighbor, anyone that taught you a lesson, anyone that you felt like led you or guided you in some way. So just take a second to think about that. And I want you to think about what the qualities that they possessed were that made them a good teacher. Were they kind? Were they compassionate? And if you want to type in the chat, you're welcome to do that. Did they encourage you when you felt like you couldn't do it? Were they your cheerleader? Did they help you see something in a different way? Or did they help you see something that you couldn't see before? What were the qualities? Why were they such a great teacher? Patient. Ooh, I love that, Jennifer. That's great. Go ahead. A couple more people type in the chat. Yeah. Kind, encouraging, supportive, encouragement, kind, great. And when you think of those qualities, I want you to embody that during our time together and in general in your piano journey, right? Forever, I want you to embody those qualities, because if you had a favorite teacher, chances are they weren't yelling at you. Chances are they weren't saying things like, you can't do this, or you're too old, or, why are you even doing this? Who are you to do this? They weren't saying those types of things, right? They were encouraging you. They were being kind. They were being your cheerleader. They were having faith in you when you didn't have faith in yourself. And so when I say talk kindly to yourself, I'm not just like saying that to say it. I really want you to try to embody those qualities of the best teacher that you've ever had, so that you can show up for yourself in a way that makes this an enjoyable process. And I'm speaking about our 4 days together, but I'm also speaking, wholly about your piano journey. Now, I also want you to encourage others in the community and take advantage of the community. So those of you that are already in the Facebook group, great. If you're not, you should have the links in the workbook and the email. We can type it in the chat if anybody needs it, but make sure that you are in that Facebook community. I'm going to have you do accountability posts each day and do your posts, and then find other people's posts and chime in the comment section and encourage other people. It's really, really amazing what can happen when groups of people that have similar goals, similar dreams, similar hobbies rally together and encourage each other. The change can be pretty epic. So I want you to not only take advantage of the community yourself, but also participate in the community. And then participate in the chat when I ask you to, and do the homework. Okay. And you're going to get so much more out of this if you are willing to type in the chat, if you're willing to do the homework, because these lessons are really going to hit home in a much deeper way if you're fully participating than if you're kind of like removed and sitting back watching. So even if you're just watching the replay, same thing, type in the comment section, make sure that you're fully participating. And then last thing, ask for help if you need it. Okay, comment in the chat or post in the Facebook community and ask questions. We typed the email address in the chat. So if you have anything that you need, just reach out to us and we can help you throughout it. All right, so I'm going to dive in. I'm going to do a little bit more of an introduction and tell you a little bit more about my story and my philosophy. And then we're going to dive into those mistakes and those myths about piano practice and how to practice. And I know I see some familiar faces, so you might have heard some of my story before, but I'm really curious for all of you that are here with me today, if you've ever felt like you've had a lot of music inside of you, but you're not able to express it with the depth that you desire. Based off of your responses to some of the questions earlier, I think the answer would be yes. And I really understand that on a very deep level because I spent years and years practicing for so many hours every single day to try to reach that deeper level of expression in music. I actually started playing the piano when I was 4 years old. And for the most part, other than like a brief quarter life crisis where I stopped for 6 months, I didn't stop. Okay. I carried on from age 4 up until now. And there was a time in my journey though, where I really did think about quitting because I felt stuck. I felt like I would sit down at the piano and I would play my pieces over and over again. And I just couldn't get them past the point. It's like I could get them all to like 60% sounding as good as how I wanted them to sound. Right. And I would go to my lessons and my teacher would give me these lists of things to do, right? She'd say like, okay, fix the rhythm in this section. This section needs to sound like the melody is singing. In this section, the left hand needs to be quieter. And I felt like there was something wrong with me, or like maybe I wasn't cut out to do it because I didn't know how to do those things. I had the list, right? And I was spending the time practicing, but it's like I wasn't reconciling the two. My practice time was not leading to me fixing the list of things my piano teacher was giving me. And so I often felt like I was wasting my time because regardless of how many hours I spent practicing, I couldn't get past that threshold of like 60%. I wanted to be able to get a piece to sound like 98% good, and I was getting it to like 60%. And I could hear in my head how I wanted it to sound. I would listen to recordings and I felt inside like, you know, I know I want the music to swell during this part, or I know that this part should sound a lot more flowing, but the way that I sounded when I played didn't reflect that quality. And it definitely didn't reflect like the depth of what I was feeling and what I was trying to express. Now, I'm really, really glad that I carried on because things did change for me when I connected with a really incredible college professor. And she taught me some practice methods that were unlike anything that I had ever experienced before. She actually sat down with me for weeks during our lessons. And she was so amazing because she didn't just give me like one lesson a week. If I needed more lessons, she would just give me more lessons. And so there was several weeks in a row where we were meeting like 3 and 4 times a week. And she would sit with me before my piano practice and she would help me plan it out. And she taught me how to take this big goal of being able to play, you know, like a huge piece like the Sixth Piano Sonata by Prokofiev, and how to break it down into hundreds of tinier goals and how to really structure my practice routine to strategize to hit all of those goals. Okay. And so that process of like learning how to take a giant goal and break it down into these little milestones that I had to hit was wildly transformative. And then she also taught me all of these practice methods that were kind of like little magic tricks that I could do that helped me reach the next milestone. And so all of a sudden, where I used to feel like, okay, I can hear what I want it to sound like, and here's how I sound, and how the heck do I get there? I just had this roadmap. And I didn't realize it at the time, but she was giving me a confidence roadmap. Okay. She was teaching me exactly how to structure my practice sessions, and she was showing me exactly which milestones to hit along the way and exactly how to hit them. She was giving me those practice methods to hit them. And so I did finally reach that point where I was able to connect with the music and play with the level of expression and quality that I had been trying to achieve for so many years. And now what's wild about it is that I work with, you know, thousands of adult piano players from all over the world. And I've realized that I wasn't the only one that struggles with this issue. It wasn't an issue of me not knowing what I was doing or me lacking some sort of quality. It's just that there's not a lot of information out there about how to practice. And I wasn't alone in this. And I've seen that with most piano players is that we know, you know, what we want to play and we have some ideas about maybe some things that'll get us there, but there's a lack of information about how to practice. And even the best teachers, I think, don't always realize that more time can be spent going over exactly how to fix problems or exactly how to get from point A to point B as opposed to just giving a list of things that need to be fixed. And so now this is where my passion lies. I don't like, I never just say like, you need to fix this, you need to fix this, you need to fix this. I like to show people exactly how to practice so that they fix the wrong notes, they move past the pauses, the performance anxiety gets less, right? And you can really get to the point that you're playing through pieces with much more freedom and much more musical expression. Now, my philosophy about learning how to play the piano is that it doesn't just take your hands, right? It's not just about how fast your fingers can move. It's not just about your hand coordination. It's not just about what your fingers can do. It actually involves three things. It involves the head work, the hand work, and also the heart work. And the head work is all about your practice routine, your mindset. It's about understanding things away from the piano. So in a way, I would also kind of lump rhythm in with the head work. The head work is talking to yourself positively, keeping a growth mindset, knowing how to pre-plan your practice routine, understanding how to develop an internal sense of pulse so that you can really conduct yourself when you're playing the piano. The handwork is the more obvious one that a lot of people know about. That's more like technique, right? Being able to utilize your body and your hands in the proper way to get the desired sound out of the piano. Okay, so that's the handwork, the actual practicing, and of course, how you practice. And then the heart work is the stuff that often draws people to music, but that then we forget to talk about later on in the journey. And that's things like being able to connect with that deeper part of yourself to ask yourself, what am I trying to express here in the music? It's being able to connect with other musicians, other people, other piano players through the music, and of course, being able to connect to the notes and putting it all together so that music comes out of your hands when you play. So go ahead and type the 3 H's. That's what I call them, the 3 H's in the chat if you like this philosophy, that it's about the head work, the hand work, and the heart work. And when you're willing to do all three, you truly become unstoppable at piano, right? Oftentimes when people are hitting those roadblocks, it's because they're working just on the handwork and they're leaving out other parts of it. And that's why they're hitting those roadblocks. And when you get to know the competence roadmap that we've been talking about, that outlines all of those milestones you have to hit and the revolutionary practice methods that get you from milestone to milestone, then that level of musicality and expression truly does become like a natural given. It's not something you have to work so hard for. Now, my favorite part about the way that I teach and what I teach is that it doesn't matter what your goals are, like I mentioned. We're going to have people in here that want to play on a concert stage. We're going to have people in here that just want to be able to play for themselves and everything in between. This framework is going to be the same for all of you. The details will be different because your specific goals are different and what you're working on will be different. But this concept of being effective and efficient and practicing smarter, not harder, is going to work regardless of level. Now, I have an online quiz that at this point, like several hundred people have taken, and probably some of you even here in this room have taken it. And I like to look at the results of the quiz every once in a while, just to see, what's going on. Are things changing? Is piano education changing? And for the most part, so far in like the year and a half that I've been giving the quiz out, it's stayed the same. And I just looked at it recently before this event last week, and I was looking at the results. And 75% of piano players know like that musicality, like playing with expression is their ultimate goal, but feel really confused about how to get there. Okay. And this totally makes sense based on what we're talking about, right? You hear a piece, you fall in love with it, you download the music, you dive in, and maybe you're the type of person that sees all of the symbols and you're instantly overwhelmed, or maybe, you dive in for several days or weeks, but eventually there's some point where you get stuck, right? And you lose track of how to get to that point that you initially set out to get to. Type stuck in the chat if this feels and sounds familiar, like if you feel like this describes your situation. Okay, and then the other part of the quiz talks about practice routines. And I ask people some questions about their practice routine and if they have a planned practice routine. And from the same results of the quiz, and this number has always stayed steady, only about 25% of people spend time pre-planning their practice routine. And I want to change that. By the end of this piano practice lab, I want 100% of you to not only have a practice routine, but also to know exactly how you are going to practice so that you get to confident musical expression. So we're really going to hone in on those two things this week. We're going to talk about pre-planning your routine and how you practice. Because if you can get a solid idea of pre-planning and you can start pre-planning as a part of your regular piano practice, and then you know how to practice once you've pre-planned, you're really unstoppable in this process, okay? So we're going to talk about some mistakes in both of those two categories so that you know exactly what to avoid. And so that this is going to kind of like pre-answer a lot of your questions so that when we dive in tomorrow to the more specific details of how to actually plan the routine, you're going to have a lot of these questions answered. Now, if you have a practice routine, you can go ahead and type it in the chat. You don't have to, and it's totally fine if you don't have one. But if you already know, like, okay, you know, I spend this long doing this, or I know I'm working on these two pieces, go ahead and type it in the chat. When I say pre-plan a practice routine, I don't just mean knowing like, okay, I practice 1 hour on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Okay. That's a start. That's a really good step in the right direction. But when I say pre-planning, what I mean is knowing what days of the week you practice, knowing what times of the day you practice on those days, knowing how long you practice each of those days. And then, and this is where I lose people, so don't exit Zoom when I say this, knowing exactly how you spend every single 10-minute chunk of practice time. Okay, stick with me. I promise I'm going to get you there. This might sound totally wild to you. And in fact, you could type wild in the chat if that sounds insane, like that you would only spend 10 minutes on a practice routine. I see, oh yeah, I see some people are spending 10 minutes or 15 minutes. That's great. This is really, really good. Okay, cool. So some of you are already on the right track. And then Mary, awesome. Yeah, I know you do that now that you're in casual to confident. Okay. So the biggest mistakes with practice routines are, one, not making one. We've already talked about that, right? So deciding right now that you're going to make one is a huge step in the right direction. Now, the analogy that I like to give for this one is that you decide right now, and just humor me. Let's play this little game together. Let's all decide right now that we're going to walk out our front doors and we're going to meet in South Africa. Okay. And we're just going to go. So everybody can just like grab their keys and walk out their front door. Now, if we were to do it that way, if we just came up with that plan to just like exit and travel to South Africa and meet there, and we just grabbed our keys and left, how many of us would get there? I don't think very many, because if I just grabbed my keys and walked out my door, first of all, I wouldn't have my passport. Second of all, I've never actually thought about traveling to South Africa, so I don't know if I need some sort of travel visa from the United States. Third of all, I don't have any luggage, so I would likely get stuck somewhere along my journey needing some things. I don't know if I remembered my wallet, and so I don't know if I have any money with me. Like that, we wouldn't get there, right? It's not possible to get to such a large, faraway destination if we don't think about it a little bit more beforehand. And this is the analogy that I like to give for pre-planning your practice routine. If you go sit at the piano and your goal is to play the Moonlight Sonata, and you just sit down and you're like, I'm going to do this, and you just start playing the piece over and over and over again, you're not prepared. There's no pre-work done. And so it's likely that it's either going to take you a lot longer to get to that end goal, or you might not get there at all. Okay. And another big mistake with practice routines is that people get really caught up with the amount of time that they're going to practice. And when it comes to time, I want to tell you that it's not as important as it seems. Okay. The main thing is I want you to pick an amount of time that's achievable. Okay. So some people, if you're like me, you're going to be like, I'm going to practice 8 hours a day. And then you might do that the first day. And then the second day, you're like, okay, that's impossible. I set way too big of a goal. And so I want you to pick an amount of time that's doable. And we'll dive more into this in the next few days. But the amount of time that you spend practicing matters a lot less than the quality. Okay. So it's not about quantity, it's a lot more about quality. So if you're getting really stuck on like, how much time should I spend on this piece? How much time should I spend on this piece? It's okay. We can come up with a number and you're going to apply this framework and then you can tweak it as you go. Okay. Now, once you have that consistency, then you can build, then you can tweak, like I was just talking about. So the much more important thing is that you pick a number, an amount of time that you can be consistent with, a number that you know you can achieve, then you can always add on. Then you can always tweak it. You can always change it as you go. But consistency is the first hurdle when it comes to a practice routine, is just being consistent in the planning of it and being consistent in the doing of it, right? Now, a lot of times people will also try to squeeze way too much in. And when it comes to piano practice, more is not better. And this is like a really common myth that is out and about, because a lot of times you hear like professionals and people that went to music school, you know, for me, there was a lot of years in my undergraduate and graduate degrees where I was practicing 8 hours a day. Okay. And so yes, there is a time and a place for many hours of practice, but it's not the most important thing. And if someone had showed me much earlier, before I met that amazing piano professor, how to spend those 8 hours, I would have been much more productive and had much bigger results during that time. So when it comes to piano practice, more does not equal better. The quality of what you're doing is really, really, really what matters. Okay. So when you think about the amount of time that you're practicing, don't be hard on yourself and think it should be more or it needs to be more. That's not necessarily true. Now, a lot of times when I talk about practice routines, people think that it's going to be really inflexible. Okay. And I'm curious if any of you think this. So type in the chat, flexibility, if this is one of your concerns. If you hear me talking about pre-planning the routine and you're like, wow, that sounds really, structured and really strict, and I don't know if that's going to fit with me and my artistic personality. And that's a common misconception, because a routine actually allows for a lot more flexibility because you're being conscious about what you're doing. And so in the beginning, it might feel like you're applying a lot more structure to something that you didn't have structure with before. But after a few days of doing it, you'll start to see that because it's a framework, it's not a prescription, right? It's not like I'm saying you have to do this for 10 minutes and this for 5 minutes and this for 10 minutes. I'm saying this is the framework that's going to get you to your much larger goal. And then you are in charge of being flexible and adjusting that framework as you see fit for what works for you. And so it actually allows you to be a lot more flexible within the confines of always making sure that you're effective and efficient, which is a huge common misconception. Now, another mistake would be not planning breaks. Okay. And we're going to dive in and we're going to talk a lot about this tomorrow, but it's really important to take breaks during your piano practice. And I am an advocate of taking breaks every 10 to 15 minutes. If you have been around for a while, then that's not shocking to you. But if this is the first time you've heard me say that, you might be like, what? That's blasphemy. Especially if you practice for like an hour at a time without taking breaks. But 10 to 15 minutes is the maximum amount of time that a human brain can stay fully focused at a high level. Okay. And so if you want to be effective and efficient with your piano practice, after 15 minutes, it's diminishing returns. If you are on minute 25 or 30 and you have not looked away from the piano for 10 seconds, it's diminishing returns and you're getting tired and your brain is not focusing at the highest level. And so at that point, you're not being as effective and efficient as you can be. And so when I say breaks, I'm not meaning you need to get up and walk around for 10 minutes. I'm not saying you need to take like an hour-long break, but every 10 minutes, you need to at least like sit in a different position, move your body for a second, and look away from the piano for at least 30 seconds. And that could literally look like you just, look away and look somewhere else for 30 seconds and maybe do a deep breath, and then you get back at it. Okay. But it's very important in resetting your brain and in also resetting your focus. Now, that kind of leads me to the next biggest mistake, which is being mindless in piano practice. And we all have done this, okay? We have all done this before, but I often will give the example of if you just walk to your piano and you sit down and your piano practice involves you just playing your pieces over and over and over again, that is not the highest level of focus that you can give to your piano practice. Okay. I'm not going to say you're being mindless. I won't accuse anyone of anything, but it's not the highest level of focus that we can give. And it doesn't result in effective piano practice. It results in a lot of inconsistency. And so when we practice, we want to try to be as mindful as possible about what's happening and be honest with ourselves. When you're repeating something 10 times in a row, really, how many times was it accurate and how many times was it inaccurate? And a lot of times people just kind of be like, I'm practicing, and they'll do things over and over and over again. And we get stuck in the doing. And we don't bring that full level of focus and mindfulness to ask, but how am I doing, right? How am I doing it? And is it effective and is it efficient? And we're going to solve all of that this week. And then lastly, one of the big things that comes up for people when talking about piano practice routines is just confusion. And I kind of alluded to this in talking about time, and confusion can look like a bunch of different things. Like you feel like you can't make a choice about how long to practice. You don't know which pieces you want to practice. You don't know what the best way to practice is. And you're going to have a lot of answers this week, but also at a certain point, you just have to dive in. You just have to try something. And if you are willing to try something for a few days in a row, then you'll have enough data to recalibrate, right? And to adjust and to make some different choices, but you just have to try something. And so if you're confused, we can talk about it and I'll answer your questions. But at a certain point this week, if you're like, I don't know what to do, just pick something and do it. And then you'll have more information and you can adjust as you go. Okay, so type in the chat which one of those was the biggest surprise for you. Maybe one of those things you didn't realize was a mistake that you were making, or you wouldn't have thought was a mistake when it came to piano practice. Go ahead and type in the chat which one resonated the most. I'll give you just a second to type. More is not better, frequent breaks, taking breaks, 10-minute breaks. Yeah, being mindful. Good. Okay, I'm glad there were some big takeaways. Now, if you plan with the level of detail that I described, where we're planning in like 10-minute chunks, your routine before you sit down at the piano, and we'll talk more about this, but this is not something you're doing like right when you sit down to practice. This is something you're doing before you sit down to practice. You will have more motivation, okay? Because you're not going to have the mental hurdle of coming up with a whole plan of what you're going to do right as you're about to do it. If you think about the tasks required, it's actually quite complex. If you think about like planning out your practice and then executing the practice, those are two wildly different tasks, and trying to do them at the same time often results in a lack of motivation because people just get overwhelmed. It requires a lot of different kind of thinking for your brain. And so when you pre-plan your practice, you'll find that getting to the piano is even more enjoyable and even easier because you're just getting to the piano to do what you want to do, which is practice. And you don't have to do all of the other stuff right as you sit down. You're going to be a lot more efficient. Okay, we're going to talk a lot about this over the next couple of days, but writing things down before and after your practice and kind of tracking like what went well, what didn't go well, it's going to help you be crazy efficient because you're going to learn exactly what works and exactly what doesn't work. You're going to learn when you need to switch things up and when you need to keep doing the same things that are working. Okay, this helps you be more effective as well, and you start to see your progress way more clearly. Okay, this helps you celebrate all of your successes. And this also motivates you more because anytime you're practicing and you're associating negative feelings with your practice, so whether that's because you're saying mean things to yourself, like, you know, why can't you do this? What's wrong with you? That could be a negative thing. It could be because you're feeling frustrated with the lack of consistency or with the repeated mistakes. Anytime there's that negativity around your piano practice, it really can dampen the motivation and it can dampen the joy, right? It can make it really hard to practice. But when you can see your progress because you've been keeping track of it and you can celebrate your successes more often, you start to have like really positive associations with piano practice. And this helps you to feel more and more and more motivated. Okay. Now, to pre-plan your routine this week, we will dive in tomorrow and we're going to talk about the confidence roadmap that I've been talking about, which goes over every single milestone that you need to hit in order to play any piece with confident musical expression. And this is an area where a lot of piano players make mistakes because there just are milestones that you do have to hit. And we live in a day and age, and I think it's so natural to be like, is there a shortcut for this? Is there a shortcut for this? Is there a shortcut for this? Or maybe I can just not do rhythm and it'll still be fine. But that's not true. And a lot of the times when we try to skip the milestones or we try to take those shortcuts, it prevents us from being able to play with freedom and fluidity and that higher level of musical expression. Okay, so we'll dive deeper into the roadmap, but the roadmap and the revolutionary practice methods, those are the shortcut, right? Those are the most effective and most efficient ways to hit those milestones. So it's not about skipping certain milestones. It's really about being able to move between all of the milestones in a very effective and efficient way. Okay, and when we go over that, we're going to dive in way deeper to how you practice. I am going to give you some of those revolutionary practice methods that are going to amplify all of the results. And I teach these methods because they work. They are, like I mentioned earlier when I was sharing my story, they're kind of the closest thing that I have to a magic trick. When people come to me and they're like, how do I fix this? How do I fix this? And I'll sit there and we'll practice together in Zoom for a minute. And then all of a sudden they can do it. And it's because these practice methods really, really do work. They help you focus at a very high level and they help you achieve repeated accuracy, which the brain loves because the brain can make great sense out of repeated accuracy. Okay. So some of the biggest mistakes that people make with how to practice is just sitting down and playing through pieces, right? And I already mentioned that. But when you just sit down and play things over and over and over again, it usually results in mindless practice and you're not bringing your highest level of focus. We talked about not taking enough breaks and then also not breaking things down enough. So if you have a big goal like I mentioned earlier, of being able to play the Moonlight Sonata, you can't sit down on day one and dive into every single page. It's too big and it's too much information for your brain to do in one day. That'd be like saying, I'm going to learn how to read today and I'm going to dive in and I'm going to start reading Shakespeare, right? It would likely result in frustration and giving up because you're not going small enough. And we'll talk a lot more about this, but oftentimes going smaller means breaking down the section. So maybe you're working on one page or one phrase or one measure. And going small enough also often means working on one thing at a time, like just paying attention to rhythm or just paying attention to the correct fingering, okay? We'll talk about not going slow enough. That's a huge one. We want to just get it, right? And oftentimes in our desires to just be able to get it, we rush through things. And slow is often the key. I like to say the only way, I'm going to mess my own thing up. The only way too fast is slow. Okay. And I mean like sloth speed, like very, very slow. And we'll talk about this a lot more in our time together. Now, a lot of times people will try to skip milestones, like we mentioned. So like not counting out loud or not using the metronome, or they won't do enough repetitions in their practice. Okay. So when you play something, if you notice there's a spot in your music that's going wrong and you decide to fix it and you play it 2 times in a row, well, that's great, but that's not enough repetitions for your brain to really fully commit it to your memory. And we'll dive in and we're going to talk a lot more about this, but we need more repetitions. Okay. And so when it comes to how to practice, we have mindlessness, we have just playing through pieces, not breaking things down, not going slow enough, and not doing enough repetitions. So go ahead and type in the chat which one of those is the biggest revelation for you or the biggest takeaway. I'm going to go ahead and just look in the chat really quick and see if we have any questions. Colin, you mean there isn't an easy button? Oh, I wish there was. The milestones and then the revolutionary practice methods, that's the easy button. Okay, so I see a couple questions I'll answer and then we'll carry on. So the issue of muscle memory is one of your Achilles heels, James, you mentioned. Muscle memory is not just an issue for you. It's actually, muscle memory is like amazing and also not amazing at the same time. Muscle memory is the fastest type of memory to develop. And in that way, it's very helpful. We have to develop muscle memory. It's the first thing that comes at the piano. It's why you can sit down and play something that you played yesterday, right? And so muscle memory is very, very helpful. But when we solely rely on muscle memory, that's where we get in trouble. And when you use revolutionary practice methods, when you focus on actually doing enough repetitions, when you focus on accuracy and consistency, you start to get things into other parts of your memory as well, beyond just your muscle memory. And that's when you start to have that, that deeper memory where you can play through your mistakes, where you can not pause as often enough. Okay, so it's part of a much bigger picture. And it kind of, everything that we're going to talk about this week ties into developing those deeper types of memory, even if your goal isn't to play from a memorized, like play memorized. Okay, so I hope that's helpful. And then I saw another question. What was it? Oh, what happens when you get bored playing the same piece over and over again because the teacher keeps assigning it? So that's a really great question. And I would say if your teacher keeps assigning things and you're getting bored, there might be a lack of knowing how either what needs to be better or like what you're striving for or on how to get there. Right? Because if you have a piece where you can hear the difference of like, this is how I want it to sound, and this is where I am right now, then usually that helps with the motivation of like trying to push you to get it there. And so I'm curious, with your experience, like if you're having trouble understanding or hearing like what the difference is and what your teacher is hearing and what you're hearing, that could be part of the issue. But also, using the 10-minute chunks like we're going to talk about and also the revolutionary practice methods is going to make your practice a lot more interesting because not only will you have more success, but you're mixing things up a lot more. It's hard to get bored in a 10-minute chunk. And actually, most often people will feel like in the beginning, a 10-minute chunk isn't nearly enough. Okay. But so stick with me and you'll have some answers for that and you'll have some things that will help for sure. So to kind of wrap up for today, I want to let you know, tomorrow we'll talk about consistency. We're going to dive in. We're going to plan out your 10-minute chunks. I'm actually going to ask you to tell me all about your routine in the chat, and we'll get you to a point where you have it planned tomorrow. But consistency is a key. You've heard me say it probably like 15 times already today. Consistency is essential in the learning process. And the analogy that I like to give for this is about a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And if you don't know how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, it's rather simple. It's 2 pieces of bread, peanut butter on one side, jelly on the other. Okay, so it's a simple sandwich to make. And I want you to imagine that you are making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And so you go to your kitchen and maybe you're in a humid place like me, so you get your bread out of the fridge and you grab your 2 pieces of bread. And then you get your peanut butter out of the fridge, you spread it on one side, you get your jelly out of the fridge, you spread it on one side. And then when you're done making the sandwich, you put the jelly under the sink, you put the peanut butter in the bathtub, and you put the bread in your backyard. Now, the next day, you want a peanut butter jelly sandwich again. Is it going to be easy for you to make one, or is it going to be kind of tricky for you to make one? It will be tricky if your memory is like mine, because you're going to be like, where did I put the jelly? Where did I put the peanut butter? How do I make this sandwich again? And that is how your memory works with piano. If you're playing a section of music and you play all of the notes correctly many times in a row, the next day your brain will remember. But when you're practicing, if you're being a little mindless or you're just kind of playing the piece over and over and you're not really keeping track of how many mistakes you're making, you play it right one way, and then maybe the next time you hit a wrong note in the last measure, and then the next time you hit a wrong note in the first measure. And this is kind of like what I just described with the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You're putting all the notes back in different parts of your brain, and you're kind of creating chaos. And so the next day when you go to sit down and practice, you don't have a lot of results to show from the day before because consistency was not there. Okay. And the scariest part that a lot of people don't realize is how much they're actually doing this, like how much this is actually happening in their piano practice. And in the group classes, in Casual to Confident Piano Player, I practice with people a lot. I like to see how people are practicing, and we actually troubleshoot together, because usually there's like one piece of the puzzle that's falling apart, and then I can remedy that in the class. And they have the confidence roadmap, so they know what milestones they're working towards, and they know the revolutionary practice methods to use to get there. But even with that, sometimes when I'm practicing with people, it's really clear that they're not doing enough repetitions of consistent accuracy. And they're not realizing how many times they're actually letting like a little mistake slide by. Okay. And we're going to keep talking about that, and you're going to get the solutions to that. So when you have those milestones, and then the revolutionary practice methods, which I was just talking about for the person that asked the question about getting bored, they work. They force you to focus at a very, very high level. And they also force you to keep consistent accuracy as the highest priority. And one of the members of Casual to Confident, I love what she said about them. Her name is Angela. And I think she shared in the Facebook group a long time ago, and then she shared in a live class too. And she was like, I tried, when I heard Ashlee talking about the revolutionary practice methods, I thought it was just like a buzzword, and that she was just going to kind of give me some things like what my teacher already gave me. But that's not true. The revolutionary practice methods are revolutionary. And Angela was able to cut her practice time down in half, because it used to take her like a whole week of practicing using other methods, or of just playing things over and over again to get them to the point that she could play them. And once she started using those revolutionary practice methods, she was able to really pare that down and accomplish so much more in half the time, because she was being consistently accurate and she was doing those repetitions over and over and over again. So if you're inspired by the idea of learning these revolutionary practice methods and the confidence roadmap, so that you know which milestones to hit and you know which revolutionary practice methods to get there, I want you to actually take notes during our time together and really try to apply these things in your piano practice, even if it feels hard, okay? Because it's one thing, like I mentioned at the beginning, it's one thing to show up and to feel inspired and to be like, yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, that's a great idea. And you're inspired for like a day or even a week. But if you take notes on these things that we're doing, even on the mistakes that we talked about today, and you really remind yourself, like, don't do it this way, do it this way, you are going to completely transform what you are capable of and what you're able to accomplish during your piano practice. So I want you to comment in the chat, commitment. If you are committed to taking what you learned during our time together and really doing your very best try of applying it to your piano practice, okay? And I'll be here to help you as you have questions, as you get stuck. This is going to be different than other things that you've experienced, right? We kind of touched on that already. We're learning a framework, and this framework will work. And if it's not working, it's likely that there's something going wrong in the application of it, or something that we need to talk about. So just make sure that you're asking those questions. Now, tomorrow, we are going to dive into your practice routine. So I want you to kind of give it some thought today, especially if you don't have one. Just jot down, like, when do you usually practice? What are you working on at the moment? What are some of those big goals? And we're going to dive deep into that tomorrow. We're going to be using the confidence roadmap to design your weekly routine that will give you the foundations for effective and efficient piano practice. Now, if you haven't already, download the workbook. Haria put it in the chat, and she's put it in the chat right now. You're awesome. Thank you so much, Haria. And then email info@casual2confidentpianoplayer.com if you have any questions, if you need anything. And then in the workbook, there is a reflection, a day one reflection. What mistakes have you been making in your piano practice? And I want you to try to give this some thought, like, think about it for 5 minutes or so. And what is your biggest takeaway from today? And once you write those things in the workbook or jot them down on a piece of paper, go ahead and do a post in the Facebook group and share your answers. And that post is your accountability post. That is your commitment. That is you showing everyone and me that you showed up, you attended, you really took the information to heart, and you're really doing your very best to learn from it. And then find some other people's accountability posts and comment on them. Encourage people, get to know people, connect with other piano players, and I will see you all tomorrow. I cannot wait. This was so amazing to be here with you. And I will also look through the chat, and I will try to answer some questions in the Facebook group, but I'll see you all tomorrow. Happy practicing. Bye, everybody.